trying to do user acquisition without, significant budgets, a game that's been around for a while and that kind of stuff. And, but I imagine if I were a new developer, new game that I think is awesome, like these guys said, you spend some time, figure out what your game's going to do or what your product is going to do, how much it's worth, and then take that and go talk to people. Figure out, it's not hard to go out these days and find out how much users cost. Various channels are different prices, but for the most part, you can get a sense of talking to a PMD, for example. You can get a sense of what are users going to cost me on Facebook for this type of game. Right? Are we talking 50 cents per user? Or are we talking $4 or $5 per user? You can go to different ad networks and ask them what's kind of the market rate. Take it for a grain of salt. No offense to the ad networks out there, but they say 5, maybe it's not really 5, but and don't be afraid to work on non-CPI rates as well. But get an idea of what it's going to cost you to get a user, and then use that, right? Figure out, I said my users are going to be worth $3, it's going to cost me $4 to buy users. Don't go spend your $20,000 yet. That's pretty obvious math, pretty easy. But figure out what's not working and how you can spend that $20,000 appropriately. That being said, there's probably a good chance that your first $20,000 will not be an ROI positive spend, and that's potentially a good thing if you're shouldn't say good thing. It could be what you're trying to do. If you're just looking for growth, there are many developers out there these days who early on spend in an ROI negative way at the expense of growth for the future. So that's one strategy that people take. I think.
Well, so now you're at growth.
Okay.
Now we're in your multi-million-dollar budgets that
Yes.
you deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah. So at that point, now it's easier. Now it comes down to analytics and it comes down to numbers. For us, we specifically work with a couple of different companies. Plug here, Playnomics.
Say it again aloud.
Playnomics. So yeah, we work with a bunch of different companies to help us make sure that we know we're doing this correct. And that's been a struggle, not just for me and for us, but for the industry. I think for the past couple of years as the mobile marketing industry has grown up, where 2 years ago when I was buying users, it was really hard to know, especially if you just launch a new game, it's really hard to know what are my users worth lifetime when, even if I've got a game that's 3-4 months old, well, what's the lifetime value of these users who may stick around for a year and a half?
But even stepping back, right? Isn't it hard on mobile to know where the traffic's coming from? So I think Andy was mentioning MMPs.
Yeah.
Right.
So
maybe everybody can, starting with you, Scott, weigh in on which MMP you use and why,
Sure.
and what's the benefits of what is this MMP acronym that's popped up
So
apparently
MMP,
out of nowhere?
mobile marketing, mobile measurement partners. It's something that Facebook made up, just like PMD. And basically what it means is they do attribution for you. So I use Kochava. I won't say why. I won't get into that. Feel free to pick. There's Kochava, has offers AdX. They all, there's others too. A lot of ad networks.
There's got to be a reason why you've chosen the partner you've worked with at scale and multi-million-dollar budgets that you're at.
There is. Feel free to come talk to me afterwards.
There we go.
We can discuss. I've worked with others as well. I'll just put that out there. But so really, the reason for using these guys is to make sure you are appropriately tracking your installs and where you're spending your money. 2 years ago, that didn't exist. We ran into an issue when I was back at TinyCo where we felt like we were paying too much for users. And so we actually did a real deep dive, some good analytics behind it, and realized that I think at the time we were paying, on average, 30% of our users we were paying for more than once. Or put a different way, for every $1.30 that we spent, we could have been spending $1, something to that effect. Because multiple ad networks were claiming that they in fact drove that user to us, and realistically we only wanted to pay one of them, even if both of them were actually trying to send users to us. So that was sort of the birth of the MMPs. They weren't called that back then, but now they've partnered with Facebook to do more than just attribution, but That's a big part of what we use them for.
So maybe Andy, you're obviously deep in the Facebook world. What's your quick take on the MMPs? And then I'd love to hear everybody else. Starting with Tyler on down. What do you guys use? Maybe you're braver than Scott. You can tell why you use them, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I'm going to try to be as diplomatic as Scott, especially since we work with multiple mobile measurement partners. But yeah, we've definitely, we're integrated with a lot of them. Has offers, AdX, and Kochava are probably the biggest three that we see. When I say integrated, I mean that they're sending their data back to us in real time so that we can optimize our ad buys not only for the cost per install, but also any relevant downstream metric. So if somebody's looking for in-app purchases and revenue as their main goal, as opposed to just user growth, we can optimize for those by getting this data from a mobile measurement partner. But I think, along similar lines, the reason that these guys are very helpful is because you can attribute better than I think you could have a year or 2 years ago, exactly which channel is driving that install, and then looking at the actual value of those users coming from a channel based on all of their in-app events along the way. So I think where it gets really challenging, and Facebook is pretty new to this because the re-engagement ad is such a new product, but figuring out once you're actually sending retention ads, once you're sending re-engagement ads to users that you already have, figuring out what the value of those ads is. So that's something else hopefully you guys might be able to weigh in on. But I know that we're struggling to prove exactly what the value of driving that user back into the app is. So for example, if somebody's downloaded some sort of e-commerce app, and then you send them an ad for purchasing, let's say, a specific deal on that site, if they go through your ad, purchase a different deal, how much of that is attributed to you sending them back into the app, and how much is just what they would have done naturally? So I think that's going to require some additional testing, perhaps running holdout tests where you're testing users who would just be organically interacting with the app versus users that you're driving back with one of these ads. But I think the mobile measurement partners are also making it a point to be able to track not just to the click that led to the install, but also past that to the click that would have led to some sort of re-engagement with the app.
Or some downstream value. So maybe that
Exactly.
Tyler and Caddy and Lauren is sort of the next phase is, okay, you have these MMPs, you guys are using whichever one you're using. How do you make sure that you're looking at the right downstream value?
So, to be completely honest with you, it's something that you basically have to, at least in my experience, either figure out for your specific game, or really like just kind of play from someone else's playbook and then evolve it into something that's specific to your game. For certain games, something like a tutorial completion is worth like $1 worth of LTV over the long term, and then for others it's worth almost nothing. It's really hard to pinpoint. What I will say though is that I prefer actually sort of like what I would call analytics solutions to track downstream, rather than the MMPs, or at least that's what I preferred about 6 months ago when I was more active in this stuff. I think that the MMPs have gotten a lot better at it though, so it's just a matter of, just make sure that your data is syncing correctly across whatever platforms you're using to track all this stuff, including your own internal ones, because if those are wrong, you're in big trouble.
Caddy and Lauren, maybe Lauren, you're both data junkies. What's LTV, and then where do you measure it? Do you measure it with an analytics partner? Do you do it yourself?
So everyone really complicates LTV as far as I'm concerned. And I think in simplest terms, you can break it down into two basic variables, time and money. And there's a correlation between the time that a user spends in your app or in your product, and then how much revenue they're going to generate for you. So again, depending on what your goals are, that's really how you evaluate the success or failure of how you market to people. And as far as using an analytics service, there's a lot of them out there. At the end of the day, I think the people that I support, they usually have like 8 to 10 SDKs that are integrated in their app, because it's kind of like a lottery, essentially. It's like they're trying to aggressively figure out what the best tool is to use, and sometimes there's no best tool. Sometimes like it's really just you put them all in there. I think that's part of the race for these middleware companies, which is like who's going to do everything unified in their service well. Right now there's like a lot of middleware companies, they do one thing well, they do a bunch of other things okay, and they claim to do some things that they don't actually do, and that's the race. And the way that impacts the app developers is that they don't have a choice but to integrate more than one SDK, and that's okay. But in terms of LTV, integrating all of those tools, like you need to understand what the negative impact is of integrating those as well. So just to simplify, like it's time and money, those are related. And if you can understand time and money in your app, then you understand a lot.
Yeah, I just to build off on that, we track LTV in a number of different ways. I think the most commonly used practice is tracking LTV by cohort date, which is date of install. But we have found that that offers a very simplistic way of putting value on consumers. So now that we have Facebook, we actually go in and try to do LTV calculation by segment. So we've seen that males, for instance, are 3 times more valuable to us than females, given a certain time period. So like Lauren mentioned, the 2 things that are super important for me coming out of any of these mobile tracking tools or outside analytics providers is retention. So are they able to give me good retention data and an incremental revenue based on that retention data, which allows me to calculate LTV and therefore ROI. I use Has Offers, love it. I love it for a number of reasons. But that's not the only tool in my box. I do a lot of internal modeling myself, so that kind of augments what Has Offers provides, but Has Offers is the basis. It gives me the basic data that I need. There are a lot of tools out there that also provide the same thing. For instance, I work with Fixu quite a bit. I'm a big fan of Fixu as well. They have a good dashboard that they provide where I can pull a lot of the raw data and do analysis myself.
Yeah, and just to speak to that, as far as creativity goes in UA, sometimes there's attributes about segments of users that you don't realize are correlating to maximizing your LTV. So as we start to talk more and more about big data and what those opportunities are, there are attributes of users that might surprise you, where their similarities as a group maximize their value. So it's a big complicated story, but essentially don't limit yourself to the traditional ways, geo, gender, age. There's lots of other things involved in segmenting out your users and discovering what their value is.
Also along those lines, I think that that's a huge focus of ours as well, making sure that you're not setting some sort of standard, CPI target across all of your different segments, but looking at the actual value of each segment, and then setting dynamic targets across those segments. So there's no point in saying that everybody is worth $2 an install for me, because you're going to lose your most valuable users if they are slightly more to acquire, but have whatever 3 or 5x return on ad spend. So you really have to compare not only what you're paying to get that user, but also their return on that investment, and not segmenting out by gender or by age or by geo or by interest or whatever you're able to segment by is I think a really big mistake that a lot of advertisers make when they go out there to get new users.
Yeah, I want to touch on one thing there too. I think it's a great point. We historically had tried to do this kind of stuff in-house, and we basically got to the point where we decided it didn't make sense to reinvent the wheel. we're not an analytics company. And figuring out the lifetime value of the user kind of, I think, requires that. And so there's a couple of different companies that really helped us do that. The PMDs actually play a big role in that because they are one of the very few companies, at least on their own, who these days will allow you to run campaigns that are targeted at ROI rather than just, I want to buy users at $2 or $4 or US females at $1.20 or, you know. They ignore all of that and allow you to theoretically just say, look, buy at a 10% ROI positive or 20% or whatever the number is that you want.